What is that? Screen two. Let's try sharing this. Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
How about now, Steve?
That's
That looks
exactly
good.
Yep, that's the one.
okay. Go back to your slides, Edwin. You can
Okay.
start anytime.
All right, what time? 7:31. All right.
Okay.
Let me see. I'm sharing my entire screen. And shrink on its own, I think, right? Oh. Haha! We'll be starting our meeting in another couple minutes, just to give us a little more time to gather in here. I guess Ted's not joining us. I guess Ted is not joining us.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to do these things when you're traveling that many time zones.
Oh, sure.
So,
all right. Let's see, what's the next slide? All right.
okay. Hey.
All right. Attention up here, if you could. Hello, welcome. My name is Edwin Lee. I am the HAI Vice Chair. Our chair couldn't make it today, but I'm here serving in his capacity. We always love to ask and find out for how many folks this is their first visit to a HAI meeting. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Welcome. How did you guys all hear about us? Very cool. Other folks?
Ted.
Nice. All right. Well, a little bit of history of who we are and what we do here. We are, and there's a few layers here. We are the local chapter for the Special Interest Group for Computer-Human Interaction, which is a subgroup of the Association for Computing Machinery. These are international organizations focused on various levels of computation and mathematical things. The computer-human interaction, so the Special Interest Group in Computer-Human Interaction, SIG-CHI, is focused on computer-human interaction, as you can imagine. HAI is charged, our mission is to raise awareness of UX stuff, essentially, here in the Bay Area. You know, we have a giant, long, very significant history of UX activity here in the Bay Area, and we're here to like spotlight that, promote how things are going now, bring in speakers who can talk to some of that history, where we are now and where we might be going as we look ahead, what their work has been, what their work is focused on now, and where they hope to go in the future. So we are a volunteer-run organization, and we are happy to have anybody interested volunteer. So we essentially have 3 officers, a chair, a vice chair, and a treasurer, and then as many volunteers as are willing to chip in. So as a volunteer-led organization, we do have costs, and we offset those costs with membership fees. So you can join HAI for $20 a year, and that pays for things like our Zoom account, bunch of other stuff that's along the way, cookies, dinner, snacks, things like that. We do have a newsletter an email newsletter that goes out every month, and you have just our general magnanimous company. So if you if it does strike you that you might be interested in volunteering, and that includes supplanting me as vice chair, feel free to email us at volunteer@bhai.org. Melissa, our treasurer, couldn't make it today, but she's a spitfire. She's great. Ted also very fiery, very tied into the history of UX here. I'm currently doing double duty as publicity chair, well, taking over as of yesterday. So happy to have more help on that front. You can share those responsibilities with me or take them over entirely if that is your power grabbing need.
I was going.
I also run a Birds of a Feather group, which is a sub interest, and that's focused on it's called the UX Life and Careers BOF. And what that is just essentially it's an hour a month that is on another Tuesday, the fourth Tuesday of the month, where people can call in. It's a Zoom thing. If you've got frustrations happening in your UX life, if you're looking for a new job, if you're looking to share a little mentorship time, any of that, all on the agenda. The agenda is very flexible. It's just whoever's there and whatever they're into. So that's an hour in the evening on the fourth Tuesdays. While I am myself looking for a job, I am also hosting Wednesdays, sort of like work afternoons from like 3:30 to 5:30. Using that same Zoom link, anyone can Zoom in and spend any of those 2 hours working on their own to-do lists. So just some company, some term that's thrown around these days is body doubling. Happy to have you join me for that. Let's see, next slide. Here today, so part of what we do as BHAI is we host these once a month speaker programs, we call them, or our monthly program. And that's where we have illustrative folks from around the Bay Area, and having switched to or added Zoom as part of our adjustment from the pandemic. Some of our speakers are from around the world. We've had, I think we had a speaker from like Germany at one point. I was a little sad about their what time they had to be awake for that. But tonight we have Professor Sandy Pentland from both from both Stanford and the MIT Media Lab. His most recent book is The Digitalist Papers, a collection of essays by leading thinkers on how digital tech and democracy can best get along. And we may have seen a very recent example of how that might be very important, both now and in the future.
Yeah. Topical.
So with that, unless there are any questions, I'm happy to turn our meeting over to Professor Sandy Pentland. Let me stop sharing here. I think I just did.
So should I start sharing? Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay, even that set things up. That's cool.
Yeah. And you
okay.
Want screen 2.
Here we go. Okay. So random name, Design for Democracy. One of the sort of diagnoses of recent years is that we got our digital media wrong, the way we do things wrong. And the question then is what could we do that's right? And so what I did is I put together a series of sort of places where science has sort of come together and had some ideas about what to do. And the Digitalist Papers is a little different because that's all these sort of highfalutin big thinkers coming together to sort of say, this is the way democracy ought to be. There's some pretty interesting people there. There's, their odd billionaire from tech, but also the guy that's in charge of running the legal vetting for the national election, right? People like that, former Secretary of State, things like that. So it's interesting to look at. It's on Amazon. It's a not-for-profit thing, so feel free. So let's see if we can make this thing work here. Okay, so I've done a bunch of different things, so you can ask me questions that are weird and different in lots of ways. So yes, I've been faculty at MIT for a long time, and I'm also faculty at Stanford now. and they've been on tech advisory boards for people like Google and AT&T. So I know a little bit about that. And we've had a bunch of spinoffs. One thing that's a little different is that in recent years, we've done a lot of things with infrastructure. So we have co-lead a group called the IETF, which is the Internet Experts Task Force that sets the specifications for the internet. And we were key in co-hosting sort of OpenID Connect, which is the identity mechanism that you all use many times a day. And sort of an impressive number, which in a certain sense doesn't mean too much, but maybe we were good, is something like 85% of all of humanity uses these identity mechanisms every single day. Not just because every mobile phone does it. Not like the and the reason it's 85 is that Microsoft and Google and people like that all adopted the standard. So hey, well, we did something. So we can talk a little bit about that too if you want. I do a bunch of other things. I've been involved in creating GDPR, ran the original discussion there, and worked for the Secretary General of the UN to specify a lot about the SDGs. So I know something about that too. So the problems we have today are not unique. And it's interesting to sort of stand back and think about that. So we all hear about the printing press, right? So what happened with printing presses? Well, there were actually relatively few books. There were lots of pamphlets, Luther's among others, right? So the first time we had sort of more mass media, we kicked off the 100 Years' War. And people were really worried about these sort of pamphlets for that sort of reason, but also because it would overturn government and change schools and traditions, and it did all of that, right? So kings were no longer in place as the only way things worked. A mere 200 years later, the Pope isn't what the Pope used to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of that comes down to pamphlets. So this is not like small stuff, okay? And then similarly, we have radio and TV, which we think are sort of benign, right? We grew up with this, but when those things eventually, okay?
Apparently this camera stopped working.
Oh, don't worry, nobody wants to see me. Okay, don't worry about it. When radio first came up, the sorts of comments about kids getting addicted and destroying culture and destroying families, that was the discussion. And so it's like, wow, this looks just like today. And radio went from 0 to everybody in a period of about 5 to 10 years. It was amazing, right? And one thing about this is that what it actually did in many ways is reinforce power structures. So famously, Roosevelt used it with his fireside chats, which you may think was good, but what it was doing is the government speaking to everybody. And okay, think about it. TV, same thing. When I was a kid, there were still 3 channels that were the major channels. And so that was the truth. Nobody else had the truth. You sat there every night. Everybody had the same truth. We talked about it. That was it. So where did that truth come from? Right? Who was included and who wasn't? Right? Well, those are the same questions we have today. We were talking earlier about the internet, early internet. Well, early internet, was all government employees and university employees, and they all had secure ID and reputations, and it was sort of limited, and it was wonderful. We all talked, had a good time, and intellectual. It was the birth of a new sort of way of being global. But as it grew up, you got people who used it in other ways. And then, of course, it got attached to advertising. And that changes the whole thing. And it had new models, like, for instance, influencer type models, which is a rich get richer mechanism that's monetized. But what that means is that in the media today, you have relatively few voices that dominate everything. So it's actually, in some ways, not so different than it was in the 1960s, except the people who dominate are the people who are shocking and radical, as opposed to George Morrow or Walter Cronkite or somebody like that, right? So it's not too surprising that we have problems, because We haven't sort of digested all the lessons from this and tried to make it good. So here's my like quick take on what we get wrong. Most everything. We misunderstand how people think. So we design these things as if humans are rational. This is incorrect. Humans are not rational. I don't just mean that we're goofy. I mean that we have social influence as a fundamental strategy for how we determine what's good and what's not good. So we are a social species. We are not an individual species. Americans don't like that, but it's true. And there's like endless sort of research that shows that. We've built the wrong infrastructure. Original internet didn't have identification, didn't have reputation, didn't have lots of things because these were all certified people who had their reputation on the line. We knew who they were. We didn't need that stuff. But as it got bigger, nobody added it. And so there's the questions today that revolve around, is this a bot? Is this a troll farm? Is this a human? Is this, you know, some crazy guy, whatever? And so these are now important questions, is what are we going to do about that? And then we have weird ideas about democracy. So this Digitalist Papers, you look at it, you know, like we have this thing that we did back in the sort of like late 1700s where we said, okay, it's really hard to travel. So what we're going to have is we're going to have representatives and we're going to have electoral college, and the little states get more per person than the big states because otherwise they wouldn't have joined. All good for 1800. Maybe not so good today. Right? So you ought to think about it. We've always had these sort of representative government structures because we needed them. You just couldn't do it. But now you can. And so what ends up happening, I would argue, is with representative things, you end up with elite capture. Now, who's going to be the representative? Are they going to have more power? Are they going to have more knowledge? Are they going to profit or their family? Yes, of course. So a little statistic, as somebody who is in academia, what percentage of people who run the country graduated from Harvard? Anyone want to guess? No, come on. It's only 1,000 people a year enroll from Harvard. Now, if you look at like senators, House of Representatives, presidents, you know, National Academy of this and that, Nobel Prizes, about 15% is Harvard. That's crazy. However, if you expanded it to be sort of Ivy League and then places like Stanford and MIT, it's over 50. No, yes, they admit smart people, but come on. Right? If you look at, for instance, at CEOs, right, who are presumably pretty competent to get where they are, I mean, on average, they don't have that sort of elite heritage. They come from all sorts of places. So why is it that our, you know, elite leadership, our people who make it go, all come from such a small group of schools and all know each other? Right? I mean, I just a little side story. I remember I set up a series of laboratories in India, and I was struck by the fact that when I knew somebody, the person I was talking to also knew them. Always. We've got 1 billion people, but everybody I talk know each other. What's going on? Well, there's this little cream of the cream on the top. And yeah, they all know each other, right? Or in France, I'm sorry if you're French, but the École Supérieure, you know, if you run anything, you went to one of those schools. And each company has a different school that everybody graduated from. And if you didn't, you'll probably leave the company. Like, okay, this is a problem. So let's go through this real quick. And feel free to like throw things, don't throw things. Interrupt, ask questions and so forth. So we make assumptions in economics, particularly in cognitive science and in design, that people are at least somewhat rational, right? That's sort of what we think. But all the evidence is that that's not true. What people do is they take into account the people they interact with. They're social. They look at the opinions and attitudes of the community that they're part of as being sort of default a priori sort of things that are true, and then they think about things on top of that. So forever, this has been sort of the state of the art people know about Milgram, right? So you can convince people to kill other people by just putting on a lab coat and having 4 or 5 people in white lab coats saying, "Yeah, turn up the electricity," and people will do it, right? Because of this sort of thing. Incidentally, if one of those people in the lab coat says, "Yeah, I'm not so sure," almost no one will do it, because now they know that there's variation in the common sense approach to things. Right? So you can quantify this. We've done that. It predicts all sorts of stuff. Why is it this way? Because you can't experience everything. And by learning from other people, you can make better decisions. Again, absolutely verified. You have to pick the right people. They have to be people like you. But yes.
Just wanted to check. Would you prefer we hold questions to the end, or do you want to surface ones as they come up?
Questions that are productive and clarifying?
Sure. Okay.
Okay. So what that ends up being, and there's papers like this if you want to do it, is that it's better to think about people as sort of explorers. We go around, we find things that work, we watch other people, we learn the stuff, and then we get this bag of tricks. And we sort of say, well, is that going to work for me? Blah, blah, blah. But we usually only do the things that we've seen people do or heard about. And so we spend a lot of time networking, trying to find other things that, could be good here. Because actually reasoning things through is really hard and we're really bad at it. Why do you think you went to college? Right? It's because people really suck at this. Okay. I once had a little book that was 256 common mistakes people make with syllogisms. So this is in like 18 words, 3 lines, 256 things that people commonly do that are wrong. That's us. Okay. Okay, so this has its roots to a certain degree in System 1 and System 2 thinking, and I think this community probably knows about that. So there's a lot of things we do that are really fast and automatic. We don't think them through because they have to happen now. And some of it's very good. Like if a bomb went off over there, what we would do, believe it or not, well, we'd do that. But we then would go over and help people, which is not actually a rational thing to do because there might be another bomb. And if you think about it, you'll go off that way. So this is just sort of the statistics of what people actually, but people are very helpful before they think about it. That's a little disturbing. But most of what we do is, of course, time limited and under a lot of pressure. So we behave very quickly, and it's this automatic thinking, which is by and large learned from the people around us. We all dress very similarly. We speak similarly. We think, I mean, you like to think of yourself as independent, but I can walk in here, talk to you for a couple of minutes, and I know a huge amount about you because of the things we learn from each other. We're very similar in lots of ways. Right? And that means I can predict what you're likely to do, and we can have a productive conversation, and so on and so forth. It's also a little bit of a problem because fast thinking isn't so great. So if you show people a social media feed, right, and you look at when they share material, okay, what you find is that what people, a best description of it is people are scanning for things that are exciting or alerting. It's like your fight or flight type of thing, right? And that generates cascades of information, of misinformation. If you ask people to reflect, is this true? The cascades diminish dramatically. Or if you even do something to make them sort of spend a little extra time, do some other sort of task, or cue them even before all of this to pay attention to accuracy. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than if you don't do those things. So we're pretty good, but it's not the GPT immediate reaction, this is what everybody thinks stuff that's good. That keeps us alive, right? That's why we don't get hit by cars and etc. But it's not great for media where you can get these cascades. Reflection helps a lot. And reflective thinking is pretty good. So an interesting thing, this is by Pennicook and Rand. and the other things were by various authors, is that people are pretty good at judging whether a particular media outlet is good or bad, reliable or not. And in fact, actually, the part that's really interesting is that Republicans are the vertical here, and Democrats are the horizontal in this other thing. That's pretty good. In fact, the agreement between Democrats and Republicans is about as good as the agreement between fact checkers. Because fact checkers don't always say the same thing, right? And the level of agreement is measured by a thing called kappa. It's a statistic. It's about the same for Democrats and Republicans. Interesting thing, except of course for certain issues. But to judge media outlets, yeah, people know what's crap, excuse me, but you know, they do. Maybe more entertaining to read the crap, or it may be something where you know you get to share and stuff like that. Let me show you a consequence of this, though. This is something that we did that I'm very happy about because I think it's extremely relevant. So we did a big experiment, 5,000 people, and then this was replicated with a very large number of people. So this is asking Democrats about what the right wing tends to do. Do they want a democratically elected leader, or do they want a strong man? Okay. And the left believes that the right is like halfway to Hitler, okay? What's really interesting is if you do the same thing the other way around, you get almost precisely the same curve. Now, why is this? Well, people who are like political theorists have a theory about this. And the theory is that the way you get elected is by rallying your base and by being, oh my God, we're all going to die. So what you do is you make these sort of radical comments, you fire people up, and of course, what people hear are lots of firing up statements, right? Now, if you actually take these people and you show them, people know what Pew Charitable Trust is? Yeah, so these are like, they go out and do surveys on all this stuff, right? If you show people this in a little sort of Q&A type of a thing, so these are the real opinions of the people, incidentally, okay? So not nearly as radical or anti-democratic as the other side thinks. And again, there's this incredible symmetry between them, okay? If you show people what Pew Charitable Trust says in a little sort of gamified thing, this is like 10 questions, not a big deal, it's online. What you get is you get people, this is where they would vote for a candidate before, and this is where they would vote afterwards. So on the one side is more strongman, authoritarian, and on the other side where they go is more democratic. So it's like a, 60 seconds, 20-minute, 2-minute sort of intervention. And what's interesting is there was a huge replication of this by some folks at Stanford, Rob Willer's group, where he looked at 25 interventions, online interventions that depolarized people. And it's like they went through and they took everything people had suggested. And this is the biggest effect, okay, they got. But there are many where you can actually sort of convert people and have it stick for at least a couple weeks. So this is a design thing. This is how do you actually make things, honest views of what's going on rather than things that are just sort of loud noise. And there's a bunch of different things. Let me see if I have this right. I'll just tell you this. So there's a special issue of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science all about this that just came out. We have a paper in there. You can, but it sort of lets you dig into it and figure out what's really going on. And then this mega study thing was in Science just recently too, about 2 weeks ago. So these are the mega study thing is things you can do online to change the way people feel about the other side. That's basically what it is. And it turns out there's lots of things you can do. And they're really effective and they're not very expensive. Sometimes they involve things that reduce engagement. So that means social media are unlikely to do them because they would lose money, but not all of them. And so, you know, I thought it was a good idea to come here and talk to you guys so you can invent better ways to do this. Okay. So that's one thing. I wanted to do three things. This is the second one. As I said, the original internet didn't need identity or reputation because everybody, we knew who they were, right? You know, one sort of class of people. And today we need ID for bots and to know people's age. We were talking about that earlier. And discover coordinated inauthentic behavior. So that's like state actors trying to do propaganda campaigns. You think you have it bad in the US, but you ain't saying nothing. You should go to Indonesia, where the government uses this to prosecute people. So when we get to the point that everybody knows that X did Y, the official prosecutor comes in, tries them, judges them, executes them. That's standard operating procedure. So this is not like a trivial issue, and we don't have it as bad as some people do. So something to sort of think about. One of the people that exposed this just got a Nobel Prize 2 years ago for that. So the sorts of things that this motivates is not giving people control over your data and over your communication. We were talking about this just before. A sort of current thinking among internet standards people and a number of other sort of entities like that is that people should have secure identities where they get to control their data and what people know about them and can figure out what other people should do with their data but not give the data away. Sounds like magic. It's not that magic. There are good sort of computer sciencey things that you can do. It requires some change in regulation and practice. And one of the main things is figuring out how to make money off of it in competition with the hyperscalers. I'm not, unless you're interested in that, I'm not going to spend too much time just to mention that, for instance, we're actually all familiar with this. You all have bank accounts in this room, right? That's your private data. You don't give it to anybody. You let your bank hold it, but it doesn't own your data or your money, right? It manages it for you. That's required to keep certain data for safety cases. And when you use a credit card, what happens is you give this magic number, and sometimes it's a one-time use number, right, to a merchant. And that magic number, which is essentially an encrypted path to your bank, right, takes that and the amount that you want to spend and routes it to your bank. Now, the merchant doesn't necessarily know who your bank is. You may not know who your bank is, right? But your bank gets this message and say, well, we recognize this hash code and we recognize the amount and we compare it to the person's data like we've been authorized to do. And we say yes or no, and then we send back an encrypted message to the merchant that yes, it's good or no, it's not good. You're talking about vaccination, right? You could imagine, this is just an example, you could imagine clinics having a database of people they've actually put drugs into. And if you want to show that you've been vaccinated, you have this one-time number that goes back to that clinic. Clinic says, yes, in the records, no, not in the records, sends it back. You don't know who the clinic is. It's cryptographically guaranteed. It's one-time use, other people can't use it. Solves a lot of the problems. Yeah.
But what you want to avoid in that scenario is the issue of knowing when and where you're presenting those kinds of proofs. That's the problem. And we were trying to get away from the surveillance economy.
So in this type of thing, they don't need to know where you are or who you're doing it with. They need to know that it's a valid source.
If it's checked with everything, right? If it's a one time, I present that once.
Yeah.
And then inevitably, they're going to know who's asking. And so the issuer will know. There are ways, think about it instead, verifying a PGP.
Yeah, you know, so under the sort of simple preferred, the thing that people are talking about, if you present your credentials a bunch of time, then the issuer, which is you incidentally, will know, or your custodian will know.
No, it's the issuer is like, the place you got the vaccination.
Okay.
And holding things in the wallet, right? In the wallet, maybe you have the data, maybe you hold it with the custodian with the trust, but that's still under your agency. And you present that credential to, let's say, back when we were reopening bars, restaurants needed to verify vaccination status.
Right. So they would know that you're presenting.
Yeah. So I'm presenting it from my wallet. Issuer doesn't.
No.
Right. Okay. That's the important thing. Avoid the issuer where these credentials, because there's a whole bunch of.
Sure. There's a bunch of things you can do with that. That's right. And I think there are ways to do that. And there's a lot of variations on this. The main problem with this actually is that the moment you talk about identification, about 50% of everybody flips out and they don't listen to anything after that. And I understand that, right? Not in Europe, incidentally, but in the United States.
It's nice to see you're meeting on there.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
I'll come back.
so things and we've just talked about, and you can use zero knowledge proofs and things like that to guarantee it on top of that. The whole thing. We have a book about this. In fact, we have 2 books now about this. If you're interested in learning about cryptography and how you use it in actual situations and stuff, they're at MIT Press. This one I thought you might be interested. So when we talk about democratic institutions, we have in this model, which is sort of the US model, at least most people do, but like Australia does it differently. Everybody has to vote, right?
You do, but people, the flip side of it is that people just.
Yeah, they go in there and they do random
They
crap.
just do random.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they do one thing that my Australian friends have not really occurred to them, is that there's no point in rallying your base in Australia because your base is going to be there voting anyhow. So that reduces a lot of the incentive to spend and fire people up and things like that. I'm not saying it does it. And they have a shorter time period where you can't, and also, because I know this personally, the government won't spend money during that time period. I mean, just won't, right? They don't do anything, right? Because it could be biased. So there's a bunch of little things you could do that Australia is a good place. I like Australia, right? We could do, and it would not cure the problem, but it would reduce the problems that we have quite a bit. A lot of people think primaries are a problem because the only people come out of primaries are the sort of really motivated people. And there's a thing called deliberative assemblies. People know what that is. Deliberative assemblies, you randomly select a bunch of people from a community that is supposed to be voting. They like 500 people at random, and you ask them what they should do, like who should be the candidate, okay? What that avoids is real activist subgroups dominating the process, which seems to be what happens here. Another thing which I particularly like is that if you have more than 10,000 followers, you're running a business. I'm sorry, you may not be making money off of it, but you're garnering power. And if there's TV or radio or anything else, that's a business and we tax it and we regulate it. So why can't we tax and regulate anybody who has more than 10,000 followers? And the regulation has to do with, are you a repeat offender? You can say things that are not obviously true, but if you're doing things that are systematically bad, you ought to be held account to that. But not forever. You don't want to quash normal conversation and civic deliberation. Taiwan does anonymous ID, not what I wrote there. but what they do is everybody who participates in the digital voting process has an anonymous ID, but it's grounded on proof that they're a citizen, right? So they have a way of doing, just like I was describing with the vaccination and stuff. So those are different things. A really interesting thing is the system called Polis. How many people know Polis? Okay, many people do. It's really pretty well known. Colin McGill has just moved to San Francisco and is going to build a new version. You might want to call him up, see what happens. We have. And he built a system probably, what, 10 years ago, something like that, which was, you know, a little bit of genius because it's sort of like the best thing out there. Now, it wasn't science, and he's not a guy who's like sort of looked at all the pieces and asked, is this really right? And what are the, and that's our job at Stanford / MIT is just to say, well, this seems to work really well. Why? What could we do to be better? So that's our goal. And so what you do is you pose a question and people begin making comments, and you can't reply to the comment. What you can do is upvote or downvote it, and you can add your own comment. But what ends up happening over a period of time is you build a citation network. So this is like, these people like that thing. These two comments sort of fit together, and you can use standard sort of mapping things to be able to say, here's the spectrum of opinion. You remember the thing about, you know, what the left people thought about the right people and the right people about a lot of things, gun control, abortion, you name it. If you could see the spectrum of opinion, it would be surprising. Like in the United States, I mean, it's surprising to most people, maybe not here. The average opinion about the average across the whole population about abortion is a little left of Europe. Okay, it's not like, I mean, there are loud voices on the edges. Okay, and that's what you hear all the time. But that's not what most people believe. Same thing with gun control. We did a thing on gun control. Turns out Republicans and Democrats think the same thing. Very small differences, except for the people on the edges. Well, that's sort of interesting. It sort of makes you want to think about, what are we doing here? If there's really consensus around some of these things, except for the edges, what do we want to do about that? And I don't think there's a pat answer about that, but I just sort of point out that you want to think about that, right? So one of the things that Paulus does wrong, in my opinion, not a broad, is it clusters people. So it says, oh, there's the blue people and the red people. You know, the moment you divide people up, you could, you know, you've created tension, you've sort of made the middle disreputable. Oh, you're neither here nor there, right? But often, like those issues I just said, you know, the middle is where it's at. Right? So I think that the colors of these things ought to be something that emerges in people's heads, but that's just my opinion. Okay. So a bunch of design choices, which I think are good, but we're looking at it, and Jose will show a little demo of the things that we're building here at the end. So no direct reply, visualization. And we're putting AI in there to help surface content consensus. So one of the big problems in these sort of systems is you get people who are just shooting hot gas, right? They're not actually trying to think about the problem with other people. And we have a question over here. Ooh, okay. Technology. You know, is this good or bad? That's the question.
I guess I was just wondering with the clustering, was it coloring or the hulls that are drawn around? Was it like you wanted to imagine?
It's a k-means clustering.
Oh, but I mean, was your problem with it? I guess I really love the clustering, and I haven't heard a critique of it, but I also like really respect for all your work. So
No. So you take this thing, right, which has no, from a mathematical point of view, no intrinsic boundaries, right? There are connections everywhere. Okay, so there's areas where there's more connections, right? And what you do is you emphasize that there's these areas where there's more connections. Is that, I'm not saying there's a right way or a wrong way, but is that what you want to do? Or do you want to say, hey, this is the center of mass? Like if you were looking for consensus, you might point out where the center of mass is.
yeah, I think in my conversation, it's like we're kind of trying to valorize the middle, or revalorize the middle spaces, but I see, yeah, it's like that's like extra work. Maybe it's better to not create them. Yeah, it's like the people between bridging are like.
Well, one of the other things that's really interesting about the sort of policy and the way it's used is it's not like one-time voting. It's a continuous process. Things evolve. So a lot of the things that we believe about representation and voting apply to single shot processes. So, Arrow's theorem, right? So Arrow's theorem says, you can get these real screw-ups with voting, which is why you might have other sorts of methods of voting, but that's only if you get a single shot at it. If you went back and you had a continually evolving thought, and then one of the things that we forget in this discussion, and I don't think it's by chance, is that deciding on policy is not necessarily closely related to the actual laws and has about nothing to do with what actually happens on the street. Because there's this big thing called a bureaucracy in the middle. You should look at some of the papers in the Digitalist Papers, like some of these people who are really senior in Biden's administration, and so and basically saying, bureaucracy, just the incentive systems in bureaucracy are a major problem, right? Because if you're in a bureaucracy and the law or the regulation says you don't have to do something, then you won't, because you could be fired for that. So it's it's really funny that people like that, who are very senior and like make the world go, think that, for instance, AI regulation is likely to be a bigger problem than AI, just because it's putting these sort of rules in there that have unintended effects on democracy, on bureaucracy. Right? I don't want to argue that myself, but it's worth looking at and considering. That's what these people think, right? So, oh yeah, and then Paula says, Colin was giving a talk just recently that community notes and X is inspired by this. I think that they could do a lot better with community notes. That's for us to do. That's something new, right? These are the papers here, like I say. One of the interesting things is that some of these systems that people are building actually include AI. I mean, by some measure, Polis has a simple sort of AI, but people are adding AI to various things. And there was a paper in National Academy of Science recently showing a type of AI, very simple type of AI, that resulted in, basically, you would formulate a comment and it would say, well, do you really want to say that? Okay. And what they were able to show is it resulted in more civil discussion, and that was lasting and propagated to other platforms, and it didn't change your mind. So your political opinions, your sort of things that you believed weren't changed by that intervention. I hope I said that correctly, right? So this is like purely good, or seems to be, making things more civil. I like that idea, right? And one of the things that we're exploring is how can we use a similar type of thing, not to change people's opinion, but to make them actually more deliberative, to really think about it. You remember, system 1, system 2, if you're all like fired up, you tend to say crazy stuff that's just off the, the shoot from the hip type of stuff. If you think about it, you might come to a very different conclusion. And so could you build AI sort of advisors that cause people to think about it a little bit more and have better discussions as a consequence? So that's it. Let's see, why don't we have, Jose, can you show things pretty quickly? Yeah. So this is like the first thing out, right? Minimum viable scientific platform that's supposed to incorporate a couple things, a variation on the visualization that we think has more evidence for it, and a very simple type of AI that is intended to encourage deliberation as opposed to changing opinions. Okay. So am I supposed to end slideshow? That would be a good idea.
I've worked with Plurality Institute and building bridging bots, and they're hiring a product manager right now.
Oh, really? Yeah.
If anyone is that
Yeah, we work with plurality and hope to propagate some of our ideas to them,
This is small.
right?
I like around radical exchange network. Something they call
Right.
Oh, but no, you can open the window. You can make it bigger.
So I think what you're going to see with plurality, I mean, you know, the basic sorts of elements of plurality are things that we all subscribe to. Yeah. And the question is just how do you actually build things that work at scale? Please. I can do many things. Is that good? Okay.
It's too small.
Okay.
Okay, so one thing that, so I'm Jose Ramon Enriquez. I'm a postdoc currently at Stanford, working with Sandy in the Digital Economy Lab, and also working with Yashing. And we are designing this experimental platform to test various modules where we are taking everything that Sandy mentioned and trying to optimize to get a better deliberation so that we can actually empower Gen AI to find scalable ways for people to have meaningful conversations. So the way we're thinking about this platform is having actually 5 the steps where it goes from what we call the Socratic dialogue. So this assumption of rationality that Sandy was mentioning, it's actually a very strong one. And it implies that people actually know their own preferences and also that that they have perfect information about what other people think about or what they even think about. So the first step in this platform is to go and have a conversation with an LLM so that so the users can crystallize their own opinion about the issue in debate. Then the second part of the platform, and I'm sorry, and we're testing different ways of doing this. Obviously, you can think of many ways that you can have this type of coach to make you more thoughtful or provide more reasonable, more thoughtful comments about a particular issue. So we're testing multiple versions of this. The second step will be a face of the crowd. So basically understanding what other people think. And we're also experimenting with different ways of visualizing what the other people think. Then the third step will be getting some sort of strategic advice. So we want to push or we want to suggest agreement. So in this case, we will provide strategic advice towards the user's own goals. Probably avoiding the edge cases or the extreme positions that we were mentioning.
I mean, an example of this is like I was saying, people often do stupid things. If they're about to do a stupid thing, you should advise them, you know, these people are coming to punch you out if you say that, right? Maybe you want to like rephrase that. You don't have to, but just saying, right? That sort of advice where it's just sort of keeping you grounded on what's other people are likely to think of what you're doing. You may want to offend people. That's fine, right? It's not our problem or our thing, but we want to avoid accidentally doing that. And what that does also is it encourages people to think about those problems. What do other people think? Right?
Yeah.
So.
And actually, we want to be very careful about agency. We wrote this white paper on democracy and digital platforms that actually Sandy didn't mention, but the idea is we want to protect the agency of people, and all this advice is going to be just advice. We're not actually pushing or forcing people towards certain direction or another. Then we have comment ordering. So we know from the marketing literature that the way we present comments will actually affect people's decisions and how people internalize information. So we want to present information in a way that actually leads into agreement rather than disagreement. And finally, we want to aggregate preferences, and we wanted to do it in a way that actually respects diversity and also the intensity of opinions of people. It's not just like voting up and down, but also we want to have some sort of represent all the diversity of opinions that people may have about a particular issue. So we have, and actually you can try this yourselves. We have a demo of this platform that you can actually try right now. We have a motivating question about AI regulation. And then you can go through the Socratic dialogue and also visualizations. And also you can leave your feedback at the end. That would be really great. Oh.
So
Yeah. Right. So the question is, can you give a scenario of use for the 5-module model? Is it for a single person or a group trying to reach consensus? So here we're trying to get some rigorous evidence of what Polis is currently doing in the field. And we want to have a group of people coming into the platform and actually having this indirect conversation with each other and actually getting into some sort of agreement. So a good case scenario would be any given proposal or legislation that it's being discussed in a particular place. Can you give it an example of how the comment ordering leads to agreement? Yes. So maybe you've seen it. Maybe if you participate in Facebook groups, sometimes when you get into the group, you'll see that a lot of comments are either very aligned with what you think, or comments are really not aligned with what you think. So the initial impression of your group might be biased towards the initial piece of information you're exposed to. So the idea here is, as people may pay more attention or may put more weight on the initial comments that they may see. And what we can do here is sorting the comments depending on whether the comments are more similar to your own comments or they're more dissimilar to the comments that.
So Michael Bernstein's group did a big thing, which won a whole bunch of prizes just the last couple of weeks, reordering comments by being driven by, did these comments express anti-democratic attitudes? And it didn't take them out. So it wasn't like getting rid of the comments. But what it resulted in was a much more civil discussion. And he also tested whether it changed people's minds, and it didn't change people's minds. And the interesting thing is it didn't change the level of engagement either. So that means a platform like Facebook wouldn't lose money from essentially ordering things to sort of not suppress, but on the accent, anti-democratic comments. I hope I said that correctly. Yeah. Bernstein, Michael Bernstein, yeah, Stanford. He's not the first author. I think he's the last author. That's how we do things in academics. The old guy is the person you mentioned, but he's actually the last author.
When they sorted the comments, did they sort them from least anti-democratic to most, or most?
You should read the paper, but what they did was a stochastic thing. So it wasn't just sorting. It was sort of like, let's throw them all in the air, but the ones that are anti-democratic are heavier and tend to move towards the bottom. As I understand it, sure.
So many questions. Really glad to know that. I won't ask all the questions, clear. But small thing, is the tool, just because I collect the code bases for tools in this space, is it open source or is it still kind of being worked on? I'd love to like just watch it. Yeah. Yeah, I guess one, I'm wondering if this idea of, I think I'm trying to think, whenever I know that there's a bad thing and we're trying to go to the good thing, like, oh, we disagree and we want to be more in agreement, I try to think how you could overshoot and like, what's toxic agreement? Or like, you're saying like, how do we order the comments for agreement? And like, is there too much of that? Could that like break the like balance? I don't know. Is there like thoughts of that? And maybe I'll hold my other question.
Well, this, I think, to me, this is one of the open questions. What you want, as we were saying, I forget who I was talking to earlier, getting to agreement is only sort of 50% of the value. The other value is having everybody understand what other people think and why we went in this direction and not some other direction. So there's an educational process that happens that's at least as important as coming to agreement, right? And so if you overshoot, you lose that educational process.
And like, it's just like, I wonder, I often think of like, the word happen up in your tension. Tension is resolved prematurely.
That's
maybe
right.
there's work left on
That's another way to say it.
Or,
I think of it as there's a space of ideas and people are sort of like wandering in the space trying to find each other. But if you don't wander across the space, you don't understand what's in between. And you don't understand why you're that part of the thing anyhow. Like, how come those people think that?
Yeah.
Right?
No, it's super neat. Yeah, and maybe just one other, and I'll leave it to others. A friend who runs kind of the good public consultations, like not the getting to yes real estate ones, but the one who actually like is interested in like rejection, has said like the thing about public consultations that is like most interesting that digital platforms tend to not do is in a real public consultation, if people are so angry that things don't work, someone can get up on the table and break the meeting. And preserving people's ability to break the process as it exists is like kind of crucial to like what a public meeting can be. Like there can be an uprising, if people are really upset and things are, and obviously you don't want the process to need that, but like, is there a way, do you think about how people break the tool or like reject it?
One of our co-authors, Lily Tsai, who's was the head of the faculty at MIT and runs a thing called GovLab, takes the opposite view, which is the thing that's important is to not have to be in the fight, but to be able to stand back and watch the fight. So gives examples of, like in a town hall, most people don't comment, but they watch what happens. Right? And so you get to see how things happen, but you don't have to be in the fight, because a lot of people don't know quite what they think. They don't want to be in the fight. They're thinking, developing their opinion, and that's really important. Or she gives another example of crowd behavior, like Hyde Park. It's the people around the edge who are getting educated about the people arguing in the middle. Right? And so that's, I think it feels like the same type of point, but the opposite direction, right? Is that yes, you need to have that conflict, but not everybody needs to be experiencing adrenaline and stuff like that.
It's always like binary. Like it seems like there's always this kind of left. It seems like there's more spaces that can be explored than just. It seems to be leaning on like a yes or no or.
I think if it's binary, you made a big mistake.
Okay. All right.
Right. I mean, of course, almost no opinions.
Yeah, exactly.
But they all have special cases and more or less, and they evolve over time. Things are not eternal. I mean, if you go back 200 years, there were things that were completely normal that are abhorrent today, and I suspect that'll be true 200 years from now too. And so you have this sort of, you think about it as like an organic thing that's sort of moving around in this idea space, trying to figure out what's going on and what's the right way to do it, and you try to get everybody in the dialogue so everybody is trying to pull in more or less the same, because that's how cultural evolution
There could be really
happens.
dimensional.
Yeah.
Rather than, I just got confused like the red and blue.
No, well, that's why I don't like the red and blues. It
Yeah.
dichotomizes it in a way. I think there's a lot of people that are sort of red, sort of blue, right?
Yeah.
If you do a big high dimensional plot of people's attitudes,
Yeah.
you don't get red and blue.
Yeah.
Actually, what you get is you get sort of people over here, and then people that go off in a third direction, which you
It
could-
depends where in space you're looking.
Hmm?
It depends where you're looking from, maybe. But, yeah. I don't know.
Well, there's a whole sort of set of people that it's not quite the right word, but it's sort of libertarian.
Yeah.
It's like, no, let's all just get along and you know, I won't bother you, you won't bother me, that type of attitude.
Yeah.
And they're not particularly left or right.
Yeah, I probably fall within that. So maybe that's where I'm leading with this.
Well, and it's one of those, like, if that's not if that's not part of the categories,
Yeah.
there are two categories, left and right, right? So you're not allowed.
Yeah.
I go, wait,
Yeah.
that's not right. Maybe I'm halfway or something. Sir.
So I've got a bit of a background in this that I don't want to go into too much, but my sense is that the more important the use case it becomes for this kind of thing, the more likely you are to attract hostile actors. And I can
Sure.
speak, actually, I do have direct experience in that, where people determined to prove that somebody didn't have the long form birth certificate to prove that they were able to be president, corrupted a process that we had set up. And it seems to suffer from people with a lot of time on their hands, which has only increased in it. So where have these tools been used successfully? Where have there been? And I know about Taiwan, and it's still on the periphery there. There was the story about Chile, right, in their constitutional convention, where they ran a big deliberative process to write a new constitution, and they put it up for a vote, and it failed the vote.
Right.
And it seemed like that it was not an indictment, I guess, against using these kinds of tools,
So-
but that could have been a big success.
So
And it wasn't,
Taiwan
so.
uses it, and the report is that it's successful, but I don't know that that's.
Is it at the scale of
scrutinized.
like our propositions or like our Congress, trying
Like
to
that,
debate
but
bills?
it's managed and rare. And the big thing they have in Taiwan is they have a very strong local culture.
And they believe a lot
every
in
community
institutions.
has young people helping old people getting their letters. It's a very
So-
different sort of thing
Yeah.
than here. Successfully in Europe and many different things. It's been used once or twice in this country. Like most things, it's only people like us that participate. The vast majority of people don't participate. I think that's like the biggest problem, first of all. And then, usually these things are started by the leadership empowering a bureaucracy to hold a plebiscite. And then you have the plebiscite, and then the bureaucracy says, this is what was said. And then the leaders say, well, okay, good. Next year. That's being really cynical. But like, for instance, France has a permanent deliberative assembly. And there's a lot of people that think it's just really.
But they don't decide their national budgets that way, right? I mean, I know there's been a lot invested in participatory budgeting.
But that's like, okay, we have a little extra money. You guys get to say what you want to do with that.
Yeah. Where are the big wins in this? I mean, the civic tech has been a domain for 15, 20 years. And I feel like.
Well, let me, if you don't mind, I'll give you, are you done with, you're sort of done. You have this thing up. No, I didn't mean that we're like arguing. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't mean to derail with that one.
Well, so let me give you two examples that I like, and one you probably won't like. So about 10% of all the laws in the United States are decided by a purely bottom-up organization called the Uniform Code Commission. And so what that is, it's a bunch of volunteers that come from every state, get together about something that is not uniform between the states, and they make a recommendation about what would be a good thing to do.
The Uniform Commercial Code?
And that's where the commercial code comes from. But also uniform adoption for kids, uniform this, that, and it's why you don't have to pay attention to state boundaries And in terms of like just counts of laws, it's like 10% of it. It's been going for 150 years. It's awful successful for something that is this sort of pickup thing where people get together and say, this looks pretty good, and then they go back and educate their folks, and it seems to work over things.
Is that harmonizing laws or harmonizing regulation?
Laws. Laws and regulation, but primarily laws. State laws. Right? Sure.
All right, I'm gonna bring in a question from chat and turn my speaker on at the same time.
So the other
Carl,
one
if you could come on.
you won't like, but has to do with the U.S. Army.
Okay.
So the U.S. Army was getting its butt kicked in Iraq in sort of the early part of this century. They reorganized themselves to be much more agile and much flatter than they ever had before, in order to, you know, be able to deal with the fact that you had sophisticated people everywhere who were trying to kill you.
Like if you have some other strong. Yeah. Serving the mission.
Yeah, but it's really interesting because when corporations talk about being flatter and more agile, you know, I think the Army, this is like the last thing in the world that will be agile, right?
So there's internal cohesion.
Yeah, they're very dynamic. Yeah, anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah.
We have a question here in the chat.
Well, it's not as much as a question. I mean, it was just a comment because, like, when you were talking about certain things, I just read a Medium article today, and there was a person talking about the class he had and the students, and he asked them about the election. And when you kind of talk about the media and how that relates to things, the 2 points he made was one, that none of the people trust the mass media, and that they're wary of text and instead are watching the video, and I think that that had a huge impact on, you know, people's choices. And the other point was just the fact that you know, that there was all this wave of celebrity endorsements, but the problem is celebrities generally tend to be rich, and the fact that people kind of looked at that and felt that they was kind of rubbing their noses and things because that was happening. And so, I mean, I didn't have so much a question about that, but I just thought, do you have any, you know, these kinds of changes in the dynamics of the people who are, you know, these are the people who are going to be voting next time. What do you think how do you think that changes what has to happen to, you know, if you're talking about like creating tools for people to type in their thoughts, the reality of it seems like it's actually moving away from reading and writing into other mediums. And what would you think about taking care of that?
Well, I guess there's two things. One is that the celebrities thing is an example of these overly loud voices. I mean, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but I don't think Kim Kardashian knows much about politics, and I don't know that I'm going to like believe her, right? And I'm not going to believe a lot of the other people that we all know the names of. So somehow you have to give everybody equality of voice. I mean, we actually had you're a silly academic, had a really nice piece in the Proceedings of the National Academy showing that if you don't have equality of voice, you destroy the ability to do deliberation, full stop, right? So what you have to do is you have to either dampen down these cascade and the capacity for cascades, or raise up the ability to be heard of everybody else in order to have the sort of classic competition of ideas that we know can generate better solutions. So, okay, that's it. It's not like my opinion. You can write down the equations, and I think they're really pretty good about that. So that's one thing. A second thing is people who know better than I do believe that fake news and so forth, fake media, you know, like videos and stuff like that, did not have much to do with this election. That doesn't mean it won't happen the next time, because they're just getting started, right? So you really need to be able to answer questions like, was this generated by a human? And I don't mean, like in the normal way where they didn't generate 400 videos an hour for 5 days, where they actually, plausibly shot it with a candy cam or something like whatever, right? And so we have to really build up the basic infrastructure for identity, for certification, for things like that, if we're going to avoid these things. And I think that the quality of voice thing is absolutely important too. And one of the little genius things about Polis is you can't put 10,000 comments in there, right? In fact, in the sort of my preferred version of it, you have to upvote and downvote people before you can put a comment in at all. And you only get to put in like 1 comment a day. So, Kim can put in her comment. I'm sorry, but it's just 1 comment. And everybody, and the other person down the street who is, doesn't have a job can put their comment in too. And they're equal in that sense, right? And everybody's synonymous, but you know that they're humans and you know that they're valid participants in the conversation.
How do you know they're humans on Polis?
Sorry?
How do we know they're humans on Polis?
Well, in Taiwan, because the only way you can get your anonymous identifier is to show them your citizenship credentials.
Okay.
Right.
So in Taiwan, but yeah.
Remember that different places have different attitudes about government. Right?
Passport to get a phone number.
When I got a phone number in India, they had somebody surprise visit where I was living several times to make sure that I actually lived there. And of course, you had to have your passport and so forth too. But God, it was like, what? There's a friggin' phone number. Yeah. Sir.
Can I share? I also related to what has teeth. Can I share something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's not like a screen, just I'm just acknowledging it's not a question right now. But yeah, there's what's really the success. Polis has had successes since then. The Finland government is a lot of people are funding new interfaces for Polis. There's 5 government projects, 4 I know of right now. Finland, I think, sorry, that's not the point of what I was saying. But basically in Taiwan, the thing that kind of gave Polis its moment and its success, it was embedded in a process that was really thoughtful. And I think a lot of people look at the tool and they're like, Polis is going to save us. And they pull it in, but it's nested with the right incentives in the right part of the process. Basically there were incentives layered on to giving people this kind of pretty advanced tool to essentially find statements that where there was deep symmetry of agreement across the difference. And so they had to use the tool to build theory of mind about the others to submit a statement that actually straddled all of them. And so it kind of says hey, you don't even have to fucking care about these other people around you, but if you want to trick them into voting agreement on your statement, which we're going to give you a reward for finding, then you have to simulate them in your mind. And so essentially it tricks everyone, no matter how altruistic they are, into empathizing across the boundaries. And then, so
I think this is absolutely critical point, right? Is you have to have the right incentives, and the incentives have to be something that's focused on the polis, right?
Yeah.
By which I mean the people.
So for them, it was they had in the V-Taiwan process, which was very dynamic and always changing, not a static thing. Polis didn't even arrive in the V-Taiwan process until I think 2 years in. It was all other tools. I did a democracy fellowship over there. But essentially there was a live stakeholder meeting after. So they invited thousands of people, of stakeholders, which they intentionally brought in to use Polis at this one phase. And then they were hey, we can't invite thousands of people into this live stream meeting, but we're going to make those powerful people, some of whom are found in the Polis. If a group showed up and logged in with a Twitter account and gave lots of good feedback, they were invited to the stakeholder meeting. But they said, we will, if you find the things that underlie the difference, the majority opinions with Polis, we will make those powerful people who have voice talk about the things that you found. So it kind of not everyone engaged in the tool this way, but there's almost like this sophisticated advanced tier where people almost, they kind of learn to like use the visualization to like kind of ask questions and form hypotheses about groups, and like there's a kind of this layered different roles. Like people can just agree, disagree, pass, but then there's like, if, and the tool does not support or encourage people to like adopt these, but it's like a smaller percentage of people kind of use it to like flesh out the boundaries or to actually articulate better the groups and kind of create more of a deep story around the groups.
It's worth mentioning that in Taiwan, the people that established V-Taiwan, this whole sort of process, barricaded the parliament and shut down the government for what, a couple months or something like that. So this is like not a group to be trifled.
Yeah.
And they got away with it.
But it's right. You could just like.
So one of the things that we hope to do, this is slightly crazy, but feel free to think about it or whatever, is if you look at who uses these sorts of tools, the people like us. They tend to be activists, educated, have enough spare time to do things. They don't have to work 3 jobs and care for the kids, right? But there's another, the people who don't participate in this do something that's interesting that is like a deliberation. And that is they play betting games on football and lotteries, and they talk with each other about it. Like, oh yeah, those guys are going to, right? So you talk, and it's mostly for fun. They all know that they're going to lose money at this, right? But it's fun talking to other people, and occasionally somebody wins some money, and that's good. So you could, for instance, create incentives for people that leave popular comments that get lots of upvotes on a platform like Polis. And if you got like one of the best comments, you'd get 100 lottery tickets. And people would do it, and they'd talk about it, right? And that incentive mechanism is what's called a prediction market, where people try to sort of put their money where their mouth is about what will actually happen. And it's known that it works pretty well.
Yeah,
$1 billion giveaway.
That was I don't really know that, but what I thought he was doing was giving lotteries to get people registered. Is that right?
To sign, you had to sign a statement. That was a partisan.
Oh, it was a pottery.
You had to be registered in qualified.
But you had to sign a statement. Well, see, that's bad. Okay. Having an incentive to get registered strikes me as good, right? And having an incentive to be able to predict what other people will say is a sort of classic thing for finding consensus, prediction markets, etc. Oh, thank you, sir. The man with electricity. Wow.
Related
Let's see
to
if
the
this actually works.
prediction market thing, like one of, because I've helped a few organizations run Polis exercises, and like I think there's really a neat, because like there's things we agree on, but like I am a human, you would get, that would be a majority opinion, but it's like what you're really trying to encourage people to do with a tool like Polis is find agreements that are surprising, that like surprise people, because that's like things they didn't know going in. So it's like you're kind of trying to index on, try to find things that we agree on that will surprise you, me, someone, and then you get like really cool, like not just boring things that you all have in common. So like surprise plays a really key role in like the most interesting use cases and the things that get the most texture in, like sometimes you'll have like people who agree with one statement in one group, and then you just people in another group will agree with the same statement, but with like, they're angrier, you know, they'll use words that are more extreme, and that's the divide. It's like the valence of the comment, like, but they kind of agree, but they want to say it different. And that's where the divide is, that, you know, if you kind of have a neutral language, like blase survey that comes out by government, you don't get to see all this texture. Whereas when people submit with their own voice and there's no one like bonsaiing their comments, and I think that's Colin's phrase, the guy who created this. Like if no one, facilitators aren't like really trying to bonsai into like neutral, you know, often politically correct government language, you get all this extra texture, and kind of new groups sometimes emerge that are just about like, yeah, emotion.
So absolutely true. So I think probably we should wrap this up because it's, but so what we're trying to do is take these things that are so exciting that maybe have possibility and figure out which things really work in a sort of a science-based way that you can reproduce and understand it better, you know, that sort of thing. And incidentally, get people jobs when they graduate and things like that, right? So.
Are you taking new students?
Two guys next to you.
Oh, sorry. I guess I'm just like curious if your lab is like I'm just following your work for years. Just to go if anyone else is something like
you know, I've only been at Stanford for like less than a year at this point. We have some brilliant postdocs, right? And there's some students working with us, and we're trying to build ties to other people who will help us do this sort of thing, both to evaluate it, but also to have ideas and help build stuff. Yeah, but we're like a new little sapling. Like you can't come over and like put a big thing on us. 'Cause we're not like that. Oh, so that's interesting to people? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I just think it's really interesting to sort of, we have all these ways we think about this stuff, but we don't step back enough and say, well, could we do it differently? Right? And I think we certainly can. And a lot of that has to do with what's really a design problem. We have a fairly good common sense of what we'd like to see, at least at a very top level. There's a lot of hard design choices when you get down there. But trying to think about it is I think, a great type of design thing to do. And there's some green sprouts that mean that, yeah, it might be possible to do this. Polis is an example of something that is, you know, a digital tool could be good. I've recently been really struck by like the Australian system, which is completely understated. Nobody's, but Australia doesn't like have these knockdown, screaming fights, and people get elected and stuff. It's like, well, you know,
It's also different because the people don't have to stay in power. It's the party that stays in power. It's the party that stays in power. So the Liberals or the Labour Party, you're voting for the party. I mean, obviously as an individual, you're thinking about who's leading it, but that same party is going to stay in power, and they could topple the guy. We could get rid of Trump and still have the Republicans.
Well, yeah.
So there's that aspect of it.
There is that, but I mean, you know, like what California has been Democratic forever, except for Schwarzenegger.
Right.
I don't really know the
was,
history.
yeah.
I don't really know the history that way. Yeah.
Because you get fined if you do not vote. I'm just thinking about that as a way of stopping voter suppression. Is that one of the key aspects of it?
Oh, sorry, no. I mean, if everybody has to show up, it changes the dynamic. You don't try to discourage these people because they have to do it anyhow. And there's no point in spending a lot of money encouraging those people because they're going to be there anyhow, right? And yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that it's like a complete answer. I agree, right?
And by the way, the fine's only $50.
You know, I spent a short period of time living in an Aboriginal village, right? You know, $50 is a lot. You know?
Hey, I can't even. What do I?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any real implementation for
which?
Of this system of? Are there any real
For the
implementations?
deliberation
so far?
IO thing?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're working on that.
Yeah.
We're not very old. Yeah.
Okay.
But week after next, we're talking with the leadership of Washington, D.C. About using it to be able to look at public services and whether they're adequate and what do the electorate think about it. Because they don't really have any good ways to know whether they're doing a good job.
Yeah.
You know, again, the only people they hear about are the really loud voices.
Sure.
Which is good, but you'd like to hear about everybody else too, right? And then, you know, we have other sort of things that are exploring. You're doing the Constitution of Guyana, right? If we're going to do it, but we're talking with them about doing it. Hopefully not, not like Chile, right?
Nice. Okay.
But
That was my other question.
one of the main things with this is to be able to find real world things where we can test hypotheses, where we can say this sort of visualization is better than that. These sorts of incentives really help, or they're just silliness, right? This sort of AI hurts or helps, you know, because we have theories about it, but everybody has theories. You got to actually sort of show it in real situations. So, good. Okay.
All right. I think
Thank you, everybody.
with that, I'm going to say thank everybody for coming, both online here and in the room. And if you guys are interested in these sorts of topics, further UX stuff, we'll be doing another meeting on the second Tuesday of next month. That's the second Tuesday of every month. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming and have a good night.